Hi, good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait another minute or two to make sure everybody gets on, and then we'll get started tonight with the leadership communications. We're going to spend some time looking at understanding office personalities. So that'll be a great topic to discuss tonight. So we'll get going in just 1 minute. Just a bit about how it's going to work out tonight. We're going to be chatting about, like I said, the office personalities, and then feel free to send your questions in. Send in your comments throughout the stream. I'll get to the comments as they come in, and then there'll also be some time at the end where we can chat some more about linking the concepts we'll talk about to leadership. And so how I see this kind of happening is we'll just present the ideas, and then at the end we can have a further discussion. But don't wait till the end to send your questions in. Get them in now as they come, and that way they're ready to go when we want to have the discussion at the end. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Laura Cole. I am a McMaster alumni. I was here and I did an honors degree in communications, and then I came back and did some more work in mediation. So I've spent my whole career and education asking the question, how do people communicate? And how does communication cause conflict? And then I specifically started to focus in on the workplace. So the last 7 or 8 years, I've spent working in different types of industries and workplaces, helping people understand why does conflict happen in the workplace. And essentially it boils down to a lot of miscommunication, as you can imagine. So what we want to present today is 4 different ideas about what causes conflict. And we can talk through those 4 ideas and see where you think you might fit. And as we think about where our careers are headed and where we're going, what we can do with that. So I'm just going to ask for a bit of assistance in here to get the slides to move forward, and then we can get going. So Scott, if you want to just pop in and see if we can get the slides to move forward, that would be great. So Scott, are you online there? The slides aren't advancing. So I'll just explain where we're headed. There's been a lot of study on office personalities over the last many years. And one of the leaders in the conversation is Myers-Briggs. And you may have heard of the colors or the disc, all of these different things. And what essentially they've discovered is that there's 4 main areas where in an office space, there's 4 main things that cause the most conflict. And one of them's being where you get your energy source. So in the afternoon when you're super tired or you're stressed out, how do you recharge? And they've discovered that there's a dichotomy here. So we're not trying to pigeonhole anybody, but they've discovered that there's really there's a choice between 2 different things. And depending on which side you sit on, it would cause a bit of conflict. So that's one, where you get your energy source. The second one is how you learn new information and the type of information that you can trust. So that's another dichotomy we'll look at. The third one is how you make decisions. And then the fourth is how we want to organize our world, whether we are spontaneous people or we prefer to be organized. So those 4 things, thank you so much, Scott. Those 4 things cause the greatest amount of pressure and stress in the workplace. So like I said when we first kicked off, we're not trying to pigeonhole anybody here. but we're definitely, we see some dichotomies in these four different areas. So, ask yourself, are you right-handed or are you left-handed? And then they've kind of designed it around the same way when we can choose between the two different dichotomies. So we'll look through those four things. And what we're trying to do is answer the question, what does this mean for leadership? So, you might have just started your career now, or you're thinking about heading into it, but we've had jobs. And I'm sure you've worked with someone that you might have said, oh, geez, I don't really know why, but they just rubbed me the wrong way, and I'm not really sure why. For a leader, trying to answer the question why for your team is actually really important. So let's go through these four dichotomies and see if we can make the connections to leadership. So that's what I invite you to type in through the chat, is as we're having this conversation, where do you see these different dichotomies being applied in a leadership role? How can you, as a leader, support your team if they're experiencing these challenges? And then for yourself, think also, how does this come across for me in my role at work as well? Okay, so the first dichotomy is, how do you recharge? And so all the work and the research on it suggests that there's one or the other. So either you're someone who can recharge from the inside through reflection and concentration, or you're someone who would prefer to get energy from the outside through action or interaction. I've hesitated using the words extrovert and introvert in this segment, although that is the true definition of the terms. I hesitate using them because what do you think of when I say the word introvert? Well, often the things that are identified with introvert is shy, quiet, perhaps insecure. And then you hear the word extrovert and you think of someone who is very loud and talkative and very friendly and outgoing. And unfortunately, these aren't the accurate interpretations of the words. The true meaning of extrovert and introvert is where we get our energy source. An introverted person is able to recharge from the inside. So at middle of the afternoon, you're feeling tired and down. An introverted person, in order to recharge, actually needs some quiet, alone time. And so perhaps that's you. Maybe right now you're thinking, yes, definitely. When I need to recharge, I need to sit by myself. Whereas someone else might be saying, sit by myself? No way. If I want to recharge, I got to get out and find people. And I want to play some music, and I want to, talk, and I'll recharge that way. And so obviously we can see where a conflict might come in if these two people share an office space, and the one wants some quiet space to have that recharging time, and then the other is trying to, get energy from talking a lot. So that's one way, but it also shows up in meetings. An introverted individual, because they value the opportunity for reflection and concentration, typically they think first and then speak. Whereas the extroverted person, because they value outwards energy and action, typically, the introverted person thinks and then speaks. The extroverted person will speak and then think. And so you find in meetings, a lot of the times, the introverted person has a lot to offer, but typically may not get a chance to because the extroverted person has already answered the question. And so for this point, I'd like you to consider about leadership. As a leader, how could you use this knowledge about this dichotomy between these two different people to support your team, let's say like in a meeting setting? As students, you see this a lot in teamwork as well. The quieter, reflective individual in the team may not always get their ideas across, or perhaps are even being misjudged for not being part of the team or not being engaged. And of course, these are, judgments we're making on people's behavior, which is inaccurate in terms of the actual default of what this dichotomy is trying to tell us. So consider the first one about how as a leader, how you might support your team, now having the knowledge about this dichotomy. So send your comments in and we'll get back to those in a few minutes. The next dichotomy is, how do you take in new information, or how do you learn new information? The other side of this too is, what is the kind of information that you trust? And this is really important obviously for communication and for modes of communication, the type of medium we're using. So the best way to explain this dichotomy is, I'm going to put up a picture on the screen, and I want you to take about 30 seconds and just have a look at the picture and then try to write down, what do you see when you see the picture? And don't think too hard into it. It's not a trick. I just literally look at the picture and then describe what you see. And we'll have a look here in just one moment. Okay, so just looking at the picture. What do you see? Okay. So what do you see? It may seem like a very obvious question, but we'll see as we kind of dissect it that there are two very distinct ways in which someone may have interpreted that photo. The first way, and have a look back at your sheet, because you want to kind of see, where do you sit in this dichotomy. The first way is, perhaps you've made a list. Perhaps you've said, I see a boat, I see a bird, I see a man with a hat. Or you may have even started to create a story. You might have thought, oh, there's a fisherman, he's returning home from somewhere, he's got a light. So you may have identified the objects and then created a story out of it. So perhaps that's what you've done. If not, perhaps you were the other way. Perhaps the photo, when you looked at it, caused an impression on you, or caused a bit of an emotional reaction to the photo. You might have written down, I see a cold night, I see a dark night, it feels lonely, feels quiet. I've had a couple people say, he's a magic man, look at what he's doing. And I've had others say, the picture really freaked me out, it was a little bit creepy. And so these might, it might seem insignificant at the moment, but let's consider how this feels when we are communicating with our teammates. The one way of interpreting information is through specific detail or facts. It's very practical. You see something for what it is. And so your list would have had the detailed list. So I see a bird and a man and a hat, and you may have started to create a story out of it. So that's one side of the coin. Whereas the other, with the big picture, the theoretical concept, it's what could be. It's the describing of the larger sweeping picture. Well, how this shows up at work is very much in our communication. And we see this a lot in the way that we send messages to one another, and the way that we try to describe details of a project, or when we try to give descriptions or processes on how to get work done. The one side gives a lot of facts and details, but unfortunately, if you're a big picture thinker and someone's giving you a lot of facts and details, you're really wondering, like, what's the point of this? Where's it going? And I see this a lot. I was working with a manager just the other day, and she was saying, I send all these very detailed emails to all my teams, and unfortunately, they still aren't doing the work properly. I don't understand what's going on. And as I was reading through some of the emails for some examples, they were very extremely detailed and minute and really, really long. And I said to her, well, if you've got someone who prefers more of a summarized version of this information, I'm afraid they're probably not reading through the whole thing. And so it's a great idea to be able to communicate these ideas in different ways. Same goes the other way around. And this actually causes more of the conflict than the first example. If someone is that big picture thinker and speaks more in terms of these sweeping styles, then if they have an individual on their team who prefers more concrete details, they often feel lost, and they want to ask for confirmation, or they want to ask for help. They really don't even know where to go. And that might be you, perhaps, if you've ever left a meeting and you thought to yourself, man, I really don't know what's expected of me right now, and I wish I could ask a question, but I'm not even really sure how to. It might be because you've been communicated to in a way, in a sweeping big picture, and you were expecting detail or looking for detail and needing detail, but the picture didn't work. So if we go back to that photo of the bird and the man, if let's pretend this is your project scope, and you're asked to describe this project to somebody, and I describe it as, it's a very mysterious night, and there's, it's cold and it's dark, and you're thinking to yourself, but okay, that's very interesting, but where are the details? What do I need to do? And you're waiting for the list of the boat and the bird and the man. And yet the sweeping person with the larger theoretical framework isn't thinking that way. And so we have to really be able to place our information in these two different dichotomies when we're sharing information, especially too when we're trying to explain new concepts to new employees. If one is looking for the theoretical and I'm giving them the practical, there's not a connection made. And so really the takeaway from this one is to be able to explain things in two different ways. And a great way of doing it, and this is what the manager started doing the other day, was she would give a quick kind of summary at the top of her email about what was happening, and then down below she would give more detail. And that way both dichotomies were answered to, and once someone read the summary, if they needed more detail, they could go down into it. But that summary would capture their attention. The problem is, if you have a theoretical person and you give them all kinds of details, they actually shut down and you've lost them. So if we can get their attention first, then they're more likely to go into the detail, which I agree, detail is important and you need to have that background, but we need to be able to speak to both sides. Then the detailed person as well will know that the details are there for them as well. So once again, send in your notes about how this is showing up in a leadership role, what we can do as leaders to ensure we are communicating for both sides of the coin. Then the third dichotomy is, how do you make decisions? And this one is a great topic for students, especially there's so much teamwork right now. I'm a professor at Mohawk College, and I think every single one of my classes has, projects to do teamwork, presentations to do teamwork. There's very little individual research going on right now, right? It's a lot of teams. And I see this as a conflict in my students all the time, is how decisions are getting made. So the one side of the coin is people who like to make decisions very quickly based on logic. They like to be very critical and analytical about how to make the decision and about what's going on with that decision. And then the other side of the coin is these longer conversations, wanting to really dissect everything in a very personal and subjective way, wanting to understand the impact of the decision in an emotional way before it gets made. I see this happening at school a lot when they're trying to come up with the topic for their projects. And if I give them a parameter around, what the objective of the project, and then I say, but the topic's up to you, the one side will have the project, identified right away. Let's do this. And where others in the team want to say, well, let's think about all of our options and decide which one is the best one. And maybe we won't even decide today. Maybe we'll wait and we'll make that final decision tomorrow. And the one side is saying, wait a minute, let's just make a decision, get it done, and move on with the project. And it's interesting how this causes a lot of conflict in the team on both sides. So on the one side, the one that wants more of the emotional, subjective process. If you've ever been in a meeting and you've tried to, voice your opinion or make yourself heard, and you might feel shut down, or you might feel that your opinion isn't being heard in a very practical or productive way. It could be that the one is having a conversation with someone who wants to make the decisions more quickly, and so both sides need to kind of give and take a little bit here. And again, we'll talk more about how this shows up in leadership in just a moment. So then the final dichotomy, the fourth way in which a lot of office conflicts are presented from, is how do you like to work and how do you organize your space? The one way, of course, is someone who's very predictable, wants a very specific schedule. They're very organized, deliberate, very planned. You may have a to-do list and you actually follow it, which is the difference. Whereas the other side could very well have a to-do list, but it doesn't actually get checked off. And it may actually be crumpled up in the bottom of your bag by the end of the day. Very spontaneous, flexible, last minute. And so this is the second one that shows up a lot in teamwork, especially I see this all the time in my classwork as well, in my student teams. This I think by far this is the one that causes the most amount of misunderstanding between the two different dichotomies. So picture yourself in group work, and you're having a really intense conversation, a really important conversation about what's happening on the project, and one person is taking a lot of notes. They're organizing the minutes of the conversation, they're checkboxing, they're flipping through their books, and someone else has arrived without a pen or a paper. So which one appears to be more engaged, and which one appears to be like they are taking the project more seriously? Obviously, the one with the book and the pen. And yet this is not the case at all. There are people who actually thrive greatly on being spontaneous and flexibility and working at the last minute, and don't actually take notes, and don't need a to-do list, and maybe don't even have a calendar, which to the other side seems absolutely unbelievable how you could operate without writing things down or having a schedule in some way. And so we see again that we make judgments about people's behavior based on these inconsistencies with our own preferences. So again, let's look at that example where you've got the one individual in the team who's taking all the notes, dividing a schedule, perhaps even having dates where you want to check in and see where we're at in the project. And you've got another person who maybe even shows up late for the meeting and doesn't bring a book and doesn't write anything down. Let's take that exact snapshot of what we've just described. And the very controlled, organized person, sometimes you might feel in that project that you are the one doing all the work, right? I'm always doing all the work in a team project. And the more flexible, spontaneous person might be feeling very controlled, actually, and feeling like they're over controlled, and someone else always takes over and does all the work. And so really what has to happen here is just some communication between it. And working with one company a few weeks ago, this exact scenario came up. They were trying to figure out why the team hadn't moved forward with the project scope. And it was literally this problem when we got right down to it, is that they were unable to agree on a schedule because the one side was wanting it to be a little more loose and relaxed, and the other side was needing something a little more concrete. And so we were able to devise something that would answer both needs without feeling too much pressure on the one side, and yet still obviously maintaining a bit of a schedule that the project scope actually needed. But what was interesting about this example is that originally I was called in to manage the conflict. So one of my, I did a diploma through McMaster on workplace mediation. And so they had called me in to manage this conflict. Excuse me. And when we got there, we realized there wasn't actually a conflict. Scott, do you mind if I get a drink of water? Okay, hang on 1 second. Okay, I'm back. 'Tis the season for scratchy throats, I think, isn't it? Sorry about that. Okay, so as I was saying, one of the most interesting thing about this one example was that I had been called in to manage the conflict. And when I got there, I realized, well, there isn't a conflict. There's just a difference in dichotomies of how they want to organize the project. And once we identified that, it was absolutely remarkable how the tension in the team relaxed and how everybody was able to get back to work. As soon as you can identify where your stress is coming from or identify where the conflict is coming from, it takes the personal away. And then you're able to focus on what actually needs to be done. And in this case, we needed to come up with a schedule that would appease both sides of the dichotomy. And it was actually really exciting to see that happen. So let's think about what this means for leadership. Let's look at the first one again. So where we get our energy source. So you'll see I've got the four ideas there, and they're all crumpled on one page on purpose because one person, as one thing's happening, the other things are happening all at the same time as well. So really all these four dichotomies we just looked at is happening all at one time to us. And so we need to be able to pull apart and see them individually, and then we want to come together and think about it as a whole. So the first one again, where we get our energy source. Let's specifically think about that in the workplace. So in a meeting setting, it's often the case that the extroverted individual speaks up first in a meeting. That's very often the case what happens. And the reason is because they need the energy in order to think. I'm so sorry. So the extroverted individual often speaks up first in a meeting because they need the energy to think, whereas the introverted person is staying quiet because they also are trying to think. And so if you are the leader of a team, or if you find yourself facilitating, Sure. Thanks. So if you find yourself facilitating a group or facilitating a conversation, keep this in mind. Often it's very tempting to go to the first person who wants to speak up. And we see this in tutorials. We see this in group discussions. If the facilitator throws out a question and the first person to put their hand up or the first person to answer oftentimes does get the spotlight to be able to do that. Thank you very much. And so it's really important as a facilitator and as a leader to give the option to the other side as well. And so a great technique for this, and one that I use a lot in my facilitating, is the think, write, share method. And so you pose a question, and then you give the opportunity to think through the question quietly, write a couple things down, and then share. And I know what you're thinking. You might be saying, but wait a minute, didn't we just say the one side needs to talk in order to think? Yes, absolutely. And now I've just told you to keep it quiet and let the other side think. That's right. Because what can happen is through the think, write, share, when you're then sharing the information, that does give the other side an opportunity to continue to think. So we are meeting both needs here by controlling the very beginning of the session and letting the other side have an opportunity to think. This is very interesting, isn't it? All this coughing. I'm going to grab the lotions as well. So the next one about how, let's go back down to the one about making decisions. That one's really important, how people make decisions, and causes a lot of issues in groups and teamwork. But one great way around this is setting up parameters around what the discussion would look like. And really sometimes it's about setting up expectations. So let's think again. We've got a group who they're working on a project together, and they're trying to come up with the topic for the project. You've got one side who wants to make a decision right away and get moving on the project, and the other side who wants to talk it out, come up with all the options first, and then make a decision. So really, it's about the expectations. Let's think about what the expectations are for those two different people. The expectation of the one side, in Myers-Briggs, they're referred to as the thinkers. The expectation of the thinkers is that they will have a decision made. That's it. That's their expectation. A decision will be made. The expectation of the feelers, this is what Myers-Briggs refers to them as, is that they will have a decision made. Interesting, right? It's the same expectation, but the process is slightly different. So if we can set up a parameter around that meeting where the thinkers know that a decision will be made, but the feelers get an opportunity to talk and think through the decision, then either one won't be so forceful about their need to get have their dichotomy met. So it looks something like this. If you have an hour-long meeting and you can right away set up the goals of what that meeting looks like, then as the feelers want to talk through the whole decision and figure out what they might have 5 different options to pick from and they're trying to sort through all the different options, then the thinkers are less likely to jump in and try to make those decisions for them, because they know the decision will be made by the end of the day. And they can sit back and let the thinkers or the feelers work through it without cutting them off. This is often something that managers describe to me when they call me for some professional training. They'll describe a scenario where, um, you know, Larry isn't respectful of John. Every time John speaks, Larry's cutting him off. Come in and fix this problem. And right away, I kind of figure I have a TF scenario going on. There's nothing more frustrating for a thinker to have to sit back and listen to a feeler talk round in circles, round in circles, round in circles. And oftentimes when that happens, the thinker will jump in and say, yeah, I know, get to the end. Or, yes, I know, can we move on now? And feelers are often getting cut off and asked to move along in their communication. So there's nothing more frustrating for a thinker than to watch a feeler talk in circles. At the same time, there's nothing more frustrating for a feeler than to get cut off by the thinker. And it's nothing more offensive than for a feeler than to constantly get cut off. So maybe that's you. Maybe you have experience where you've been in teams and you feel like you're not getting your point across and people aren't allowing you to speak up. It might be because you're in a conversation with someone who wants to get to the end. So what's the solution? Well, it's not what you think. Picture a team of all thinkers. Can you imagine that team? Everyone wanting to make very quick decisions based on their own logic, and very few opinions or very few options would be considered. But then at the same time, think of a team with all feelers. Nothing would get done. You'd have lots of great conversation, lots of great ideas floating around, and yet nothing would get solid. There wouldn't be an absolute decision made. And so in teamwork, you actually want both. You want the thinker and you want the feeler. And then all that needs to be done is you set up the parameters around what the objective of each meeting looks like. Allow the feelers time to explain themselves and think and go through lots of options. And thinkers knowing that at the end of the day, the decision will still be made and you'll still get your project scope done on time. There just might be more communication happening than the thinker feels is necessary. But let's combine those two things together, and this is where it gets very interesting. Think of a extroverted feeler type and an introverted thinker type. So we've got one side, the extroverted feeler type, who is very vocal with their communication, wants to talk a lot, wants lots of options and to explore all the options at great length. And then you have an introverted thinker type who actually prefers to think quietly and prefers to make decisions very quickly. Put those two people on a team together and you can see where the conflict would come from. And perhaps I've just described a team you've worked on yourself. But again, if you can identify where the stress is coming from, then you are able to do something with it. You remember right off the top of our conversation today, I had said, have you ever worked with someone that you just didn't really get along with and you didn't know why? Or someone just kind of rubbed you the wrong way, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it, and then you felt like you didn't really like that person? Chances are it's actually one of these things, and it's not about that person specifically at all. It's that you have opposite dichotomies, and that is actually what's causing the conflict. So if we can, as leaders, help our teammates understand where the conflict is coming from, then you are in a much better position to actually solve that problem. So I want interested in hearing your feedback on that, seeing where these dichotomies may have showed up in your experiences, and then we'll try to offer some guidance or some advice on how to work through these office personalities. So as those are coming in, I can share one story with you that it's as a professor, I get asked for references all the time from my students, either for master's programs or for work, for job placements. And I can share with you the question I get all the time is, how well do they work with others? How well do they get along with their classmates? How did you find them in the class? And it's an interesting question. They of course get to the grades and they want to know all that stuff at the end. But the first and foremost thing that they're interested in is, how do you get along with others? And it speaks very much to this type of thing, that in an office setting, especially nowadays when we're heading into this open concept office space, working with a lot of different personalities in an open office space, being able to understand that these dichotomies are at play will really help you be able to have a lot of self-awareness about your role and how your own dichotomies might be influencing the space, and then also being able to have some self-awareness about others that you work with and how that might impact your space as well. So the soft skill question is huge, and that's the one that I get more than any others when people are calling me for references. That's the one I'm definitely getting. So consider where you're working, and perhaps this is coming into play, especially in these open office environments, for sure. Another story, I worked with a gentleman this morning, doing some coaching with him, and we boiled down that he was a very introverted energy person, and they discovered that he really needed that quiet time in the afternoon, so didn't get that, and that's where a lot of the conflict was rising in the afternoon. So we discovered that getting that break in the afternoon was very helpful for him. So I do hope that you were able to take a bit away from where workplace office conflict comes from, keeping in mind the 4 different dichotomies, and being self-aware about where you fall in the landscape, and how perhaps conflicts that you might be having aren't about people at all. They're about dichotomies, and you can build some structures around that. So I thank you very much for joining us this evening, and excuse the coughing, but I suppose that is 'tis the season. So thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting with you perhaps another time. Take care.